Morning. What a great day the Lord has made. We are so blessed. We're so blessed to have hope in our lives through Jesus Christ. I got one real quick announcement before I introduce our guest speaker. Just want everyone to, in your bulletin, you can see that the Harvest Sunday website is up. You can go in and use the QR code to get to it or go through Realm and do your pledges or contributions anytime. So we're so honored now to have David and Karen Henniger here. David has worked at Sunset International Bible Institute for the past 7 years. He works as the Dean of Missions and is in the functional role as Dean of Facility. Is a student care counselor and is an instructor for AIM, the residential program and the master's program. He served as a missionary in Nicaragua for 6 years. He has spent nearly 2 decades in local church ministry. He holds degrees in ministry, missions, marriage, and family therapy, and Bible studies. I may need to talk to him afterwards. He and Carolyn have been married for 21 years, and they have 2 boys, Isaac and Levi. He is most passionate about family, God's mission, and his kingdom, and all of humanity coming to truly know the one true God and his Son, Jesus Christ. Please welcome David.
Thank you, David. Well, it is a thrill to be here with you as you guys prepare for your Harvest Sunday coming up. And I know that I'm a new face up here, and lo and behold, you all are new faces to me, too. It's a thrill. And you guys had Paul Dowell here last week. What an amazing guy he is. He's become one of my dear friends. In fact, he's like my immediate boss. So if I mess up, let's just keep it between the two of us, okay? But I've enjoyed working with Paul for a long time, and I know that you guys have supported him for a long time as well. And so it's just a thrill to be a part of this. Let me encourage you, right? You guys have had these posters up, I don't know for how many weeks now, but let's go ahead and make sure that you stop by and read about these people that you support out here in the mission field, right? These are the people that are taking the Word of God with them and proclaiming it to all of the nations like Jesus has commanded us to. So spend some time in prayer as we work up to this coming Sunday, as we seek to support them and bring them the finances and the prayers and the support in various ways that they need to continue their work. I want to spend some time this morning talking about why we go on mission. Why it is that we go on mission, right? It's important. Like, we have people that we're supporting here, and we want to know, what is the purpose behind us going? Why is it that God has sent us so that we can be his hands and feet in this world? And as was mentioned there in that little bio, I spent some time in Nicaragua. Are we coming? There we go. Yeah, it's pulling up. I spent some time in Nicaragua. And we were there for about 6 years in a little town called Henniger. It's actually pretty big for that area. It's there in the mountains. And we did a lot of different things as far as ministry was concerned, none of the least of which was bringing the gospel to people. But we did that through various avenues. And you can see kind of where it is on the map up there and what some of the people look like. There's an aerial view of the city where we served for the greater portion of 6 years as well. And, more often than not, we worked kind of in the rural areas surrounding the city. So we'd go even deeper into the mountains a lot. And it seems like more often than not, probably 1 time out of 3, in all reality, we would drive up and we would have a particular plan for a community that day that we were working with. And it would seem like that they would need something different than what we intended to bring them during that time. And so we would tend to those particular needs rather than what we had planned for the day. And that's just part of missions. That's part of ministry, right? Is you kind of navigate and you figure out what's needed in the moment. And I remember one particular day as we headed out into that community that there was a particular woman that was way up in the mountains that needed some medical attention. And this woman had given birth the night before. And so we took our Toyota Hilux. It's not a Toyota that you're probably real familiar with here in the States because it would never meet emissions reports, right? But it's a workhorse of a vehicle. And so we drove this truck into places that you should never take a truck, up into the mountains, deep into the mountains. And we came up onto this woman's house, and it was a know-nothing house, right? It's pretty typical. Dirt floor, tin over the rafters, maybe some plastic wrapped around for shelter. And it turns out that this woman had given birth the night before. She had a couple of midwives there that were still with her. But it turns out that the child that she'd given birth to was stillborn. She needed some medical attention. She still had some things going on with the pregnancy that needed to be tended to. And so our job was to take her to a medical facility, which was down the mountain somewhere else. Well, when we got there, this particular woman, she wanted us to witness this child. And so we went in there and we sat there with her and wept with her over her loss. Prayed with her. Loaded her and the midwives up into the vehicle, and we headed to this medical facility just bumping down these roads. We finally arrived at this medical facility and got her all situated in there. And as we stopped and we just kind of gathered ourselves, me and my group, we gathered ourselves and we just kind of said a prayer for her. And as we're praying, we see another woman, a totally different woman, walking up the road toward this medical facility. And she also is pregnant, and she's just huge with child. And so me and Juan Carlos, my Nicaraguan brother, we run toward this particular woman, and we think, we got to help her somehow. And it turns out that her water is broken. And we didn't know it at the time, but she had twins inside of her belly. And we thought, okay, well, she doesn't need to be walking the rest of this way because her water is broken, and so we're going to carry her. And here I am, 6'4", and here's Juan Carlos that's 5'0", and the idea was that I'm going to take one leg, and then he's going to take the other. But the height differential was so awkward that I thought, okay, well, maybe it's a better idea if I just carry her, right? I mean, she's a tiny little Nicaraguan woman. So I did. I took this woman and got her situated into this medical facility. She ended up giving birth that day, and I came to find out later that one of the twins that she gave birth to, she named David, after that big white gringo that carried her the rest of the way. So there's a little David running around in Nicaragua somewhere because we had this opportunity. And so it was just this day of highs and lows and just deep emotion as we experienced ministry together. Well, we had this tradition there as my team. We would meet on Thursday nights, and this happened to be a Thursday night. And we would get together, and it was just kind of our time as North Americans to sit down together and sing songs in our own language, pray, and have a Bible study together. You know, something that was in a culture and in a language that we were familiar with. And so we would get together, sing songs and Bible study and eat a meal together. Things like that. And I remember singing a song maybe that you're familiar with, East to West. Anybody know that song, East to West? As far as the east is from the west, as far as the worst is from the best. It's from Psalm 103. As far as the future is from the past, as far as the first is from the last, He is holy, I'm unworthy. He is faithful in all of His ways. He is worthy, and I'm unholy. He has taken my sins away, and oh, how far He's taken my sins away from me. Just a beautiful song about all these metaphors about how God has removed our sin from us, right? Just a beautiful song right out of Psalm 103. We got to verse 2 of that particular song, and it was this. As far as the heavens from the earth, as far as the dyings from the birth. And I just lost it. Because dying and birth were not that far from me that morning, that whole day, right? They were so intertwined. And I use this particular story that I've just conveyed to you, as well as multiple other stories, in a class that I teach at Sunset International Bible Institute called Mental Health on the Mission Field. And the whole idea is that I introduce this and a half dozen other stories to begin to set the tone for a deep need that missionaries have that stretches far beyond what most of the rest of the world experiences. And I don't have time this morning to really sell you on the idea that missions and ministry have a very specific profile to them in their effect on the human experience, but let's just say that you trust me here for a moment that is the case, that it's challenging in different ways. I'm not saying it's more challenging, it's just challenging in different ways. That there are heartaches and there are challenges for the missionary that most of this world doesn't have to experience. And I think that there's a number of reasons why that is the case, right? I think that, missionaries, they're reaching out and they're touching people in challenging times and in circumstances in their life, and they're doing it in a different culture and probably a whole host of other reasons. And so my big question that I want to ask us this morning is, what's even the motivation for going, right? If it's going to be so hard, why do we even go? Why do we go? It's hard. It's dangerous sometimes. It's full of heartache. Why would anyone ever choose to go? And maybe it's not why do we go, but why do we support this? In a world, right, where anyone can be reached with a keyboard and social media, aren't there better ways of just teaching the gospel this day and age? Why are we called, then, to be the hands and feet of God? And I don't want to negate any of the avenues that people use to learn the gospel. There's some really good tools out there. The tools that we have at our disposal to reach people, they're wonderful and they're incredibly important. But they will never be a replacement for people literally and physically going to a particular location. Even with World Bible School, which tends to be more correspondence-oriented, and man, I encourage you to support that as much as you already do as well. But people put their feet on the ground with World Bible School to follow up with people because there's something about the human contact of reaching out and touching somebody, literally, physically, emotionally, relationally. And so the question is, why do we go? And I think that the quick answer that most of us come to is that he commissioned us, right? He already told us that this is what you should do. You should go. That's who you should be. Jesus in Matthew 28, he comes after the resurrection, and he says that all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go, therefore, into all the nations. So go into all the nations. Preach the gospel. Baptize them into the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. But I want us to move beyond even that this morning. Beyond him telling us and commissioning us to go, we follow the example of him who went. He's the source of mission himself, Jesus himself. Think about this. Jesus himself actually went. John 1 proclaims that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So Jesus was there. He was God in the beginning. And then John 1:14 says this, and the Word, who is Jesus, he became flesh, and he made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. He was in the beginning. He was and is God, and he came. He went on mission to you and to me. He left the high status next to the Father to become just like one of us. The very nature of who Jesus is the one who went. Just consider that for a moment. The very nature of him is the one who went. He has the authority then to tell us to go because he has already gone himself. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 9, that though he, Jesus, was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. So Paul proclaims that Jesus gave up this incredible status next to the Father so that you and I could be with God and share in the inheritance alongside of him. And this wasn't just some token gift that he gave us. And I don't know that you've ever had a token gift, like somebody's required to give you a gift, so they give you like a gift card or something. And you're like, oh, well, that was nice, I guess. That's not who Jesus was. It wasn't just a token gift that he gave us. He did it all the way. He gave the gift all of the way for us. Hebrews 2, verse 17 says that he was made like us in every regard. So he didn't just partly become a human being. He became a human being all the way. And that means that the creator of the universe, he put on human flesh. He had to learn, like you and I did, to walk and talk. He had to have a mother and a father, albeit adopted as he was, and a family who tended to his needs. He had boo-boos that needed to be mended and kissed, just like you and me. He experienced both great joy and great heartache as he engaged in relationships with others. And we see it very clearly in John chapter 11, when Lazarus has passed from this life. And Jesus knows that here in just a few moments that Lazarus is going to be raised from the dead because of the longing and the hurt that he sees in Mary and Martha's eyes. He weeps alongside of them. He experienced utter terror as he faced the prospect of crucifixion in the garden. He experienced the sting of death in a way that is more profound than any of us will ever experience it. He became like us in every regard so that we could have the relationship and the riches and the glory that he had with the Father before the beginning of time. And we're not going to read it this morning, but that's basically what Ephesians chapter 1, the first part of Ephesians chapter 1 just outlines for us, is that what we have in God and the riches that we have in God because of what Jesus accomplished in this world. And Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, he's going to sum this up in such a nice poem that I think probably most of us are not just familiar with, but we're probably intimately familiar with this poem that Paul gives us about Jesus and his incarnational ministry of becoming a human being and him being on mission for you and me. And I just want to read it to put it in our minds here for a moment. This is Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 through 11. Paul writes, though he, Jesus, existed in the form of God, he did not regard equality with God as a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself by taking on the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men and being found in human form. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Paul talks about this incarnational ministry and mission of Jesus and his humble attitude and his ultimate exaltation by the Father. But do you know why Paul lays this out for us there in that particular place in Philippians? He says right before this poem, this attitude that Jesus presented to the entire world, that should be your attitude as well. You do it like he did it. That's what Paul says. You do it like he did it. Do you know that it's pretty normal when we worship something, we tend to become like that thing? There's a whole theology behind that. We're not going to go into it. There's a couple of passages that you can explore on your own time at a later date up there. Psalm 115 kind of takes a negative, and actually Exodus passage takes kind of a negative aspect of this as well. But we become like what we worship. Have you thought about that? We become like what we worship. It makes sense, really, if you think about it. One of the best examples, and maybe the metaphor doesn't quite cross over, but one of the best examples is teenagers. Teenagers, typically between the ages of 13 and 15, maybe up to 16, right? They're looking for who they are during this time in life. They're looking for what friend group they're going to represent to the rest of this world. And so they locate a particular friend group, and this friend group talks a certain way, they dress a certain way, they act a particular way, and have a particular set of values. And lo and behold, that teenager that's trying to fit into that group and idolizing that group in some way, they start to look and sound and act and dress like that particular group. We become what we worship. We become what we worship. I don't know if there's any, and this is just another way of saying this, I don't know if there's any Lord of the Rings fans out there. I'm trying to hit different people in the audience, right? Lord of the Rings fans. Okay, a few. Go read the books. If you don't want to read, go watch the movies kind of thing, right? J.R.R. Tolkien, a contemporary of C.S. Lewis, wrote this fascinating trilogy of books. And one of the things that's being examined there in Lord of the Rings are these two characters, Frodo and Gollum, right? Gollum has let this ring of power corrupt him so much that now he's just this emaciated creature because he's worshipped the power of the ring. Whereas Frodo is carrying the ring, but he has his eyes set on something else. We become like what we worship. So we want to be people that are worshiping the right thing. And if we are worshiping Jesus, guess what? It becomes the most naturally godly thing in the world for us to begin to become like him, to go on mission ourselves, if he is the object of our worship, which I hope that he is. In Romans 8:29, Paul is going to say that we're being transformed into the perfect example, into this perfect image bearer who Jesus is, by being conformed to the image of Christ. And so we go, because not only did he tell us to go, but because he went himself, and we want to be like him as we worship him. So if we are to go like he went, and we are becoming like him, it begins to beg a particular set of questions in my own mind, and hopefully yours as well. What did he do? When he was on mission, what did he do? And what was his purpose? Because that's going to inform us of what we do and what our purpose is when we go on mission as well. Out of Jesus' own mouth, in Luke chapter 19, verse 10, he says that his purpose is to seek and save the lost. And I don't know how to express to you in a brief amount of time just the maverick nature of this purpose statement of Jesus, to seek and save the lost. It goes so far beyond what the Jewish person's understanding of what God's anointed, the Christ, the Messiah, should be doing. But this is what Jesus said his purpose is. And we see him doing it, right? Jesus goes to the outcast. He goes to the downcast. He goes to the sinner. He goes to places where no good Jewish boy should go. And like to Samaria, right? To the woman at the well. He ministers to her. And then he proclaims that these people, all of these people in Samaria, the untouchables as far as the Jewish people are concerned, they're ready for what God is doing through him, through the person of Jesus. His mission, seek and save the lost. How? By means of putting things back together that were broken. By means of putting things back together that were broken. This will be part of his purpose statement that Paul gives us in the beginning of Ephesians as well, when he says that God's purpose in Christ is to bring unity into all things under him. In other words, to make them whole under the wing of God and his family. To make things whole in the presence of God. And this includes, right, us being reconciled to God and unified with him through Jesus. But the avenues in which that happens are different from moment to moment and circumstance to circumstance. It all happens through Jesus. Don't mishear me, right? It all happens through him and being baptized into his name and being reconciled to God. But how do we go about ministering that particular thing? So how important is that message that he brings us? Especially, right? Especially as I look at a world around me. Right now, as I look at a world around me. As I look at a world around me, I see just brokenness everywhere. Anybody else? See brokenness everywhere. Just consider a list here with me really quickly. Politics and war. Those things are off the chart right now. It doesn't have any prospect, as far as anybody can see, of it getting real better real soon. I mean, I'm prayerful and I'm hopeful that God will intervene in those things, but there is brokenness as far as politics and wars are concerned right now. Cultural, ethnic, and country divides are all over the place. There's families on a more microcosm level. There's families that we know that have broken over and over and over again as we see those different examples in front of us. Our bodies themselves, they're corruptible. As we age, we get sick a whole lot more, and then eventually we pass from this life. There's war, there's disease, there's hurt on every corner. And I have to begin to wonder, can wholeness and unity even exist in this world? I want to make a very clear statement to us this morning. It was never meant to be like that. It was never meant to be that way. I want you to consider creation from the beginning. God, before time, he's unified with and whole in relationship with himself. He created everything and he called it good. He walked in perfection with humankind. Even when he divided mankind into male and female, he brought them back together in wholeness. And for a time, before humans and evil abused and selfishly chose the things that they did and altered the format of God's creation, everything in heaven and on earth was whole and it was perfect. This was the intent from the very beginning. That was the intent. At least through one lens even, we're looking through the story of the Bible from Genesis up to Jesus to see who it is that's going to bring unity and wholeness back to a system that you and I helped to break. Because as we know, it didn't stay that way and whole for very long, did it? Even from the biblical story, when Adam and Eve, they ate from the tree, their relationship was fractured with each other. Intimacy and vulnerability, they needed to be covered because of their own shame. God's relationship with man was fractured at that moment as they hid from God. Man's relationship with God's good world was fractured because all of a sudden the ground is producing thistles and childbearing is much more difficult. There's a fracture that happens between brothers that leads to the death of Abel. Cities and walls and wars and selfishness reigned so much that the world was in such a state of brokenness, it needed a fresh start through a flood. Of course, as we know, that fresh start didn't last too long either, did it? There at the Tower of Babel, people wanting to be like the gods in the sky, they needed to be divided. Even the unity of a nation designed by God himself, Israel, didn't last too long in the scope of history. The nation splits in two. And there's exile number one, attacks the northern kingdom. Exile number two wipes out the rest of the kingdom. It's a story of brokenness and fractures and disease. And I feel like Paul there in Romans chapter 7 as I consider the narrative of Scripture, thinking to myself, who's going to save me from this body of death? Who can do it? Who can do it? But you know, I know, Jesus was that solution to those fractures, wasn't he? He is that solution to those fractures. He enters into the picture and he starts mending things that were broken. And so he does. He ministers to the broken hearts. He ministers to broken bodies and broken spirits and broken relationships. He's touching and he's healing those that are untouchable. And then when his ministry is complete, he's hanging on the cross and he says it. He says it's finished. It's complete. There's a resurrection. The last piece of a broken world is healed as Jesus himself defeats the final enemy, Paul will call it, death. He defeats death. And then he ascends into heaven, and the parts of humanity that would come to God through Jesus, they would be unified and whole once and for all under that name that is above every name. This, brother and sister, Christian, this is the gospel that we take into the entire world. That Jesus heals. Jesus makes things whole. Jesus, he is the one that changed everything. He's the one that changed everything. So, you and I and the missionaries that we support here at Granbury, they move forward in love. We're seeking to love this world like God loved this world through the person of Jesus. As 1 John 4:19 says that we love, why? Because he first loved us. So when we talk about being involved in missions, missions is built into the person of Jesus. And because we are becoming like him, it must be built into us as well. It has to be. So we go. We send. We support. We pray for. We encourage missionaries to go. Our motivation, we go, right, because he said to go. But we also go because he went. Our purpose as we go, we reach out to bring Christ's wholeness to individuals and groups back into a system that desperately needs it. Because that was his purpose. We endure and we move through moments of joy and struggle and heartache and ministering to people that are desperately hurt, that also hurts us as well, because he did it for us. Our vision as we go is that one day we will look around in eternity, see a kingdom that was built, not by human hands, but throughout history that you and I had the opportunity to join with God in helping to establish. Our desire as we go is that Jesus will change the hearts and minds through the baptism of his lordship, and it will turn their whole world upside down in all of the right ways. Our hope is that we will watch as people realize in this present age that their eternal future can be secured through the Son of God, Jesus himself. What a glorious thing, right? What a glorious thing it is to see when a person's faith extends beyond their immediate world and focuses on God, the God of all eternity, putting their faith in Jesus Christ and His sacrifice. And so the stories of those changed individuals, right? Those are a motivating force for the missionary as they see those individuals who are changed, that are becoming more like Jesus every day, so that every heartache, every trial becomes worth it to the missionary, becomes worth it to him, to her. That's why we go. It's why we go, because we want to see that one person or that group of people changed, to see their faith in God be the driving force of their existence. I remember, this wasn't on the mission field, but it just illustrates it so beautifully. It was actually right when we got back from the mission field, we settled into Sunset Church of Christ. It's a large congregation. It's about 1,000 people on a Sunday morning. And we're used to worshiping in these tiny little locations in Nicaragua. We sat down, and just the singing was just so deeply emotional, right? So beautiful to hear the songs. And I remember one particular song. It was kind of new to us at the time, 10,000 Reasons. We know that one here? Yeah? 10,000 Reasons. Just a beautiful song about worshiping God with everything that we are. Sun comes up. It's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever, I should be singing. Whatever may pass and whatever comes before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, O my soul, O my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing with me. Sing like never before. O my soul, I'll worship His holy name. And it was there, on the final verse, sitting in the back of the auditorium with my in-laws and my family around me. We didn't hear this voice until that final verse. But on that final verse, a very aged, masculine voice sings out with all of his heart. And on that day, when my strength is failing, the end draws near and my time has come, still my soul will sing your praise unending. 10,000 years and then forevermore. And it was a pretty new song to us. And every single time we sang that song, from that moment on, it would just be on that third verse. And on that day, when my strength is failing, the end draws near and my time has come. I never looked back. I never looked back to see who it was that voice was coming from. I just heard the passion of it. And I heard the faith inside of that. Then we sang it one morning and that voice was gone. I don't know that he passed from this life. All I know is that his faith was looking forward to it. His faith was looking forward to being in the presence of God fully, in an unmatched way, a way that he'd never experienced in this world before. And that's what drives it. That's what drives missions in the heart of a missionary, right? It needs to be what drives us all as far as missions is concerned, to hear that one voice in all of its faith singing, when the end comes, I'm going to be with you. And then we rejoice. We don't grieve like the rest of the world because we know that person is there right next to God with Jesus himself. Listen, you all have proved over and over again that you're passionate about missions. Let's keep that going. Let's move in ways that support those that are going out. And listen, you're not too old, you're not too young, You're not too anything to be personally involved in missions yourself. He wants you to go. And maybe that means going to a foreign land, but maybe that means walking across the street as well. Sharing Jesus with your neighbor. Sharing Jesus with the clerk at checkout. Sharing Jesus and love and ministry and a heart in the world that is around you at this moment. Listen, we're going to sing a song this morning here in just a moment. And we don't want to stop and say anything about what God is doing in your heart right now as well, right? We want to make sure that you have an opportunity to respond if Jesus is working inside of your life and your mind and your heart right now. If you want to put him on in baptism, or if you have any other need this morning, I know that this congregation wants to minister to you. Would you come while we stand and sing?